Hi, this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast. This week, we're offering 5 conversations from episode 9, in which Hannes Hagström joins Jörn Schattenberg, Louise Campbell, and me to discuss recent work on in-office scanning, impact of different diet types, and patient prognoses. Plus, from the vault, a conversation from last year's EASL Congress about patient identification and screening along the clinical care pathway. This conversation starts with a commercial thought from me. The recent launch of a second VCTE in the United States, specifically Hepatoscope from e-Scopics, coupled with increased promotion of the scanning device Velacur from Sonic Incytes and increased education and promotion of FibroScan itself, will lead to dramatic increases in knowledge and awareness on the part of providers, which will drive significant increases in patient scanned and scan frequency. I then note the downside to this issue. The increased presence of scanning devices, coupled with the fact that FDA-approved Rezdiffra without requiring biopsy, might make it more challenging to recruit patients to biopsy-based clinical trials. The group demurs as to whether this new issue might motivate FDA or EMA to move towards NITs as benchmarks sooner, but the group is highly confident that it will lead to improved liver health if coupled with increased access to training for prescribers and advanced providers, and separately, sensible reimbursement structures. Jörn Schattenberg shifts to discuss LiverAim, a new EU consortium with the goal of demonstrating that testing affects outcomes by comparing matched cohorts of 50,000 patients each. If the study demonstrates cost-effectiveness of screening, it will address reimbursement, the second problem Jörn identified, and speed the rate of purchase of devices. Louise asks whether LiverAim will include a brief interventional therapy and conversation, 2 elements she finds vital in treating liver patients. Jörn states this is not the primary study objective, but might occur. Louise goes on to ask how the study will address cultural and governmental differences between countries. Jörn notes that this is complicated, but hopes these issues will fall out in analysis. It's striking how fast new research around issues of patient treatment and therapeutic options are stacking up, and how the number of questions grows even faster than the number of studies. This conversation covers several points, but it's pretty strictly focused on treating the right patients the right way at the right point in time with the right agent. So just sit back, listen, learn, enjoy, and when you're done, join the dialogue in our LinkedIn discussion group. The second takeaway is that FibroScan is at least somewhat accessible. If you go to the States, one of the things that's happened in the last couple of months is that e-Scopics is launched commercially with a different device, but it's a VCTE-driven device in terms of the analytics, and it's got a very different cost and reimbursement structure than FibroScan does, which may make it more accessible in primary care offices and other locations, which means that over time we will have the ability to track patients in more different settings. Between the work that FibroScan, that EchoSense is going to do, and making FibroScan more available, and then having competition. I've said this a few times on this podcast that what I used to tell my marketing clients is that when you only have one competitor in a space, the issue is, well, do I do it or not? And as soon as you have a second competitor, the question changes from do I do it to what do I use to do it? So the presence of this data, the ability to show that more different kinds of diets can be helpful and can be measured as helpful using VCTE, and then the presence of a couple of VCTE competitors should make it a lot easier to manage patients at large in the society, which I think is a usually good thing. Every good thing has a problem, which is the more we talk about this, the less incentive there is for any patient to do clinical trial anymore. Every good side has a bad side. The FDA not requiring biopsy for prescribing of Rezdiffra at the same time that they're still requiring biopsy for clinical trial designs. If biopsy is one reason patients don't want to go into clinical trials, makes it even tougher to do that for first-line patients. And the fact that we don't have standard of care and we're still talking about using placebo control groups as the control is a second. So at the same time that we're making this a lot more enticing for patients and doctors, we're making it a little more complicated for clinical trials. And one of the questions I'm going to be asking every session that gets even near this topic over the next few weeks is, do we believe that the kinds of papers that we're talking about now will ultimately move FDA or EMA further down the path of not requiring biopsy in clinical trials? Because if you talk about major breakthroughs in the next couple of years, that as much as more drugs would be a huge one. Just throwing it out there. Does anyone have a thought on that?
Hannes Hagström.
I guess your guess is as good as mine, because I'm not really sure how the FDA works or what makes them make decisions here and there. But I guess the more evidence we get that non-invasives are also prognostic, and changes in non-invasives are suggestive or predictive of changes in risk. And actually what could be even more meaningful right now is showing like you have a reduction due to something. So you have not a falsely high FibroScan result leading to an improvement, but actually a treatment. So if you can track that, for instance, with weight loss, you can see that, okay, these patients have a reduction of 20 kilos or whatever in weight, and then the FibroScan levels improve. and then the prognosis is better, then those kind of studies could probably be more persuasive also. But in terms of exactly what the requirements are, I'm not sure. But what are your thoughts on this tricky topic?
Jörn Schattenberg.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is the availability of the exam also, and that's why we need to provide primary care and care providers with easy access to an affordable diagnostic tool. And they have to be able to actually bill the patient and the healthcare system to provide that. And in Europe, that's not as straightforward as in the US, based on the way of the reimbursement of diagnostic testing, which is typically not specifically reimbursed unless you get a specific code and you have to apply for them. So it's a long story, which is doable, but there needs to be more thoughts on how this is achieved down the line, in particular in Germany. So I wanted to share something with you guys that you might have heard of. Is that was a big EU consortium that's recently been kickstarted, which is called LiverAIM. Now, this consortium wants to use diagnostic testing in patients, randomizing 100,000 people, 50 versus 50,000, and testing versus no testing, and showing that testing actually does impact outcome. I mean, the study you now presented here, Hannes, shows that changes in the NITs do predict outcome. But the question is there a rationale to screen patients, and do we have prove to show that screening is effective, cost-effective, and does save lives? And I think for liver disease, that's quite a hard burden. And the excitement that this EU consortium brings, which is going to be funded for 5 years now, is that this type of large-scale randomized trial for diagnostic testing is actually going to start soon. And that's going to hopefully answer some of those questions, whether we should start screening and which patients should be screened, and then see what comes out down the line. Big trial. Will be many more years until we get the results, but it's good to have it done at one point.
It's super nice and super important, and very impressive of all the contributors to the project, of course. And I think it just shows that exactly what we need. We're still sort of a small field, and we need really to come together and do these kind of big studies in order to really change what people think. So huge congrats to you guys for doing that.
Louise Campbell.
Jean, can I ask, a lot of liver units and things that I know, they're still struggling to keep up to date with their current workload. To add that sort of large capacity on causes issues with capacity in the NITs, but also in the experience, as Hannah said earlier on podcast, in the context of the experience of those people doing those scans. For me, FibroScan is not only a diagnostic tool, it's a treatment. When you give a brief interventional therapy and you talk to people, I don't know how the protocol, I've not seen the protocol, to be fair, is controlled. Is it just a result, or is it brief intervention at the time? Is each different area doing something different? And will that be detailed so that you can see the effect of the NITs being used versus the behaviour change and stuff? But how much drilling down? Because that's a vast volume of patients to be bringing in.
Yeah, sorry. So the primary endpoint is really the outcomes data in patients that have been screened versus not screened. The ones that are identified undergo a brief behavioral intervention or more intensified therapy if they're advanced disease, but that's not the primary outcome. You cannot introduce multiple interventions in one clinical trial. Even if you enroll 100,000 patients, then you randomize and do something different, that's not feasible to be answered within that study. Still, the patients will be offered some solutions. The workload you were addressing, I think in a lot of places, hepatologists are still not using the available biomarkers to actually sort out the referral pathways. I think that's why we've been working on that so intensively. If you ask your referring physicians, you get sent every GGT that's abnormal, but you might not have to see every GGT that's abnormal, and you really want to see those advanced liver disease patients. Now, that is difficult because it takes educating your referring physicians, being in close contact with them, who do you want to see, who do you don't want to see, and every time a primary care tells patient, you should see a hepatologist, and then the hepatologist says, no, I don't think I have to see that patient. There's a certain, there's a lot of need of communication with the patient, with the referring physician. Well, why don't you see that patient? And it goes all over again. And that's kind of the workload. I think the time we have better NITs that tell us this patient is likely to have an outcome that's going to benefit from as a hepatologist, my consultation, then we can actually hopefully focus on the right patients. Maybe not decrease the workload, but kind of increase the ones that we can have an impact on.
The other thing that I did think about, and I think it's important, is the psychology that the patients come from. Each different country has a different system, and different people react differently. A British patient going through the different system, whether they've been hospitalised, institutionalised and placed in that sort of system and become that way, or they've been kept independent thinkers. We've discussed it earlier, this whole way of motivating and empowering a patient. Different systems work on different ways that patients are paternalised by physicians or healthcare practitioners. That is going to, are you measuring that? Because that is a vast amount of countries with all different types of patient psychology. And unless you have that, you just can't say that this is going to do this and this screening. Because I often say it's not about screening for liver disease. Maybe that's not cost effective, but screening for heart disease or fatty liver that affects heart disease and diabetes, that may be more cost effective. But the psychology of each of those.
That's always the challenge in Europe, where you have multiple medical systems and reimbursement systems running in parallel. So if you have clear measures, you can capture that. And we're hopefully going to, there's going to be confounders in different countries, but we're going to capture those and hopefully come up with a result showing that there is useful screening for liver disease, or for screening for advanced liver disease in patients, maybe not in the general population, but in the at-risk population.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmash.com. We're still working on next week's topic, but we've got 2 ideas and they're both great. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.